Welcome back to another episode of Pulling Threads. Today, I'm very excited to have Ashley Ann, a trauma specialist, neuro counselor, educator, TEDx speaker, super jealous of that, and the founder of the Gravity Point Institute. Ashley has a PhD. She brings nearly 20 years of research and clinical experience to a question most practitioners never fully answer. Why does trauma work feel like guesswork? And her answer became an entirely new prevention first paradigm, the gravity point method, built on the promise that stress and trauma can be resolved, not just managed. Today, Ashley empowers everyday people and practitioners alike to move beyond surviving and into systematic, step-by-step process for self-regulation. So one of my absolute favorite things to talk about, if you ask any of my clients, it's our number one topic every session. So I'm really, really excited to have this conversation. Welcome to Pulling Threads, Ashley.
So thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I wanted to start with talking about, obviously, I've read your bio, and you, like me, I'm assuming you didn't know this growing up, but you grew up as a highly sensitive person before we had language for that. I know for me, when I read the book, Highly Sensitive People, not only for myself, I was really reading it for my son, but I saw myself in it. And there were a lot of tears. I didn't know that I was a highly sensitive person, but things just started making sense. What was it like for you growing up as a highly sensitive person before we had a word for it or an understanding of what that meant?
Sure. When I think back to my childhood and when I describe it, it was it's strange because on the one hand, I could not have been loved and supported more, right? I was surrounded by parents who loved me. Even after they got divorced when I was a teenager, they showed up for me. My extended family was present and committed. We had a roof over our head, and my parents worked really hard um, to make ends meet. And so, on the surface, I was also very a high achieving, smart little girl. Um, so, in a lot of ways, I felt like I didn't have a lot to complain about, right? At the same time, I was sick all the time, whether it was a respiratory infection or something going on with my gut or had skin problems for the longest time. And even back then, as much as my parents sent me to an orthodontist and a chiropractor and a physical therapist, we didn't really have therapy, like mental health therapy. So
Right.
I didn't really have the language for it, but I was very anxious and depressed pretty much all the time. It was very hard to get out of bed. Um, but again, like I said, very confusing because on the surface, everything looked fine and everybody else seemed to be having like an easier time of it.
Yeah.
So it was as I was growing up, I don't think I would have told you, actually, I know I wouldn't have, that I struggled at all. And
Yeah.
it wasn't until, like, this is fast forwarding quite a bit, but in my mid 20s, I became a trauma therapist. And in my first full time job, where I was seeing 16 to 18 clients a week, and then specializing in trauma. So they all had very dysregulated systems. I was also teaching in the university at the time and doing supervision. It was at that point when I burnt out really badly, worse than I had my entire life. That's when I started to ask the question, why does everyone around me look like they're doing so well and look like it's easier for them? And why am I struggling with, like, why can't I be happy and healthy? And
Right.
it took a long time for me to get to the point where I really recognize that not only am I highly sensitive, but I'm also neurodivergent. And that
Mm.
just means that I have to exist in the world in a way that's very different than the people around me. So, yeah, I
How
didn't
did you
figure it out.
identify that part? How did you identify that you were neurodivergent?
So I think that when I became a trauma therapist, so this was in my mid 20s, I entered a really unique training program where they have clients right away
Yeah.
and they train you alongside of that. And at that point, I developed the language for being an empath. "Oh, you're an empath." And
Yeah,
there was a huge community of people at that time, especially in the spiritual spaces and the metaphysical spaces, that were claiming that language of being an empath. And that
yeah,
was really my superpower as a therapist. So
right.
I think right at the beginning, I understood that I could pick up on more, and we had in our training. But it
Yeah,
wasn't until I was 29 years old and I was in my PhD program that I had a neurofeedback training. So I went to be trained to do something called neurofeedback, which is
yeah,
a process of regulating your brain, right? So I was
yep,
becoming a certified expert in that. And so we were practicing on one another. And so we didn't expect to find anything, but I had all the sensors on my head. And I was really surprised when my result came back with strong patterns associated with autism, which was a huge surprise to have that language. Since then, it really has been, I think about my whole story and it's all been puzzle pieces, but I do feel like discovering my sensitivities and then also my neurodivergence was a huge part of understanding why life was so much harder for me than everybody
yeah.
else and why I, for example, am very easily manipulated when I get into
Mm.
relationships or why I find myself in toxic dynamics and having language for that changed everything.
Interesting because I don't think people connect those dots that often, but it makes sense, and it probably means because of your sensitivity, and I can 100% relate, so I'm saying you, but you feel so much so intensely, and so you would think because you're more sensitive, we would pick up on things more, but in some ways, do you feel like you're almost more drawn to people who have the red flags and the toxic behaviors? What's your thought on that?
So I think my answer now would be different than my answer in my mid 20s. So the thing that's coming up for me was when I started as a trauma therapist and I started in my training, you do sessions and then you have your supervisors listen to it, right?
Yep.
Evaluate
Yep.
you on it. And one of the things that my supervisor said in our very first feedback I ever had gotten was she said, "You're sitting there and you're thinking too much, saying a lot. You're just thinking too much." And at that time, I was in therapy myself as a strong suggestion from the program. So I was unearthing all kinds of things I didn't know I was carrying around. And what I really started to understand is that I wasn't thinking too much when I was sitting across from a client. I was feeling too much. And because I had spent my entire life feeling too much and not having words for it, my system just shut it all down. So it's like this really interesting dynamic that I used to struggle with. I don't anymore because of the work I do, but I used to struggle with being so feeling that my nervous system only had the choice to shut down. And I think that's what happened for me personally. I think that's what happens to a lot of like my sensitive clients is
Yep.
that you find yourself in these dynamics that are really toxic and really confusing and really hard, partially because you're feeling it all,
Yep.
but also partially because you learned to stop trusting those feelings a long time ago. And
Mm,
so it's like you numb yourself out. I numbed myself out in relationships and in toxicity because that was just how I had learned how to survive.
yeah.
And so I think it's a double edged sword. On one hand,
Right.
yes, I got used to get stuck in them because I was highly sensitive, but it's actually because of my survival mechanism of being able to tolerate and numb out in
Mm,
those experiences that kept me in them, sometimes for way
yeah.
too long.
Yeah, I know I'm more prone to go into freeze than any other survival. Like, I'm gonna bypass fight or flight most times and go straight to freeze for similar reasons. Again, I've done a lot of work, and so now I know that about myself. And for me, it's almost if I start feeling myself numbing out or removing myself, dissociating, whatever it is, the fog starts, then it's a signal for me. Oh, like something else is going on. Do you feel like you can use it now that you've done this work? You recognize it or you feel things. I feel everything in my body now because of the mindfulness work I've done and that training. So I don't know that someone listening who hasn't done this type of work could understand. So maybe we'll get there. Or if you could just give, I think, an explanation of like now, because you've done the work versus before, what are the signals that you feel now that something isn't right that you may not have had before or you may not have recognized? Because I think one of the things I was most surprised about when I started really doing MBSR, EMDR, and they kept saying, "Tell me where you feel it in your body." And I was like, I don't know what they even mean by that when I started that work. But now, the minute PTSD kicks in, something triggers me, the instant I can tell identify it in my body. So, in your words, and I guess maybe even the way you would describe it to a client, because I want to assume that not everyone understands all of this the way we do. This is what we work with. And the purpose of this podcast is really to help people understand better so they know what kind of therapies they might need or what kind of work that they could do to improve their life. So tell me how you would describe this to a client.
So I think the best way that I can describe it is actually to talk about my own process of way to it. And I went through my most of my life not knowing that I wasn't feeling. Like I didn't know that I was shut down. Like I said, I started therapy in my mid 20s and I was doing also becoming a trauma therapist at the same time. And the thing that happened to me the most during sessions or even during class, or what I started noticing, is that I zone out. That to me was my first understanding of what it means to be triggered, is I would just daydream. And that as a kid was my number one survival. Daydreaming and fantasizing and like having something else on my mind was just normal to me. But as I started doing this work and understanding the body and the nervous system, I started understanding that zoning out was actually my first sign that something had changed. So before I had access to my body, before I had access to, I think about being in toxic relationships now, I don't even get close to them because my stomach turns over. But that was not accessible to me. I
Right.
did not have that tool from the beginning. So my sort of pink flag, then my red flag would be zoning out. And in therapy, we call that dissociation, but the zoning out was my feedback. It was the only feedback that my body could give me at the time, which was
Yeah.
like distraction and I am no longer in my body.
Right.
So that was my first tool. And that's how I knew that something was wrong. And I could go into this now and I don't know where we'll go with it, but I was in that state of not being connected to my body, even though I was doing all the things. I was in therapy sometimes twice a week. I was getting stellar training in therapy myself. I was doing yoga. I was meditating. I was journaling. I had lots of family and friends. I had lots of alone time, exercising, running, doing yoga, doing energy work. I was doing all of those things and still not feeling connected to myself. And for me, that turned out as burnout, serious burnout, which I think a lot of people get to at some point or another, especially
Yep.
those who are most sensitive, whether it's burnout in our bodies or burnout in our relationships where we just quote can't take it anymore.
Yep.
And that was my low point in my mid 20s where I experienced my first significant piece of burnout.
And that is when you almost walked away from your career at that point?
Yes, because I was really frustrated and feeling really lost. At that point, I was a full-time therapist. I was working as a university professor and a supervisor, and I was also doing a 2-year marriage and family fellowship. So I was obviously overworked and underpaid. That was definitely what was going on to
Right.
some extent. But at the same time, I was looking at my peers with similar thing. They weren't struggling the same way that I was. And like I said, I was doing all the things. And I was like, the only thing at this point I feel like I can do is quit my career. I had spent so much time and money, and it just made me sick thinking about it. So I wasn't finding answers outside of me anymore. And I think I'm a very stubborn person. We say willful in my family. We don't use stubborn because we don't think it's a negative quality. I'm very willful. So I just refused to quit. And at that same time, I had fallen back into a very toxic relationship, a toxic
Okay.
relationship I had years before. And somehow those things have gravity. I think
Right.
they come back and like I called it, and I think I was feeling whatever I was, but I re entered a relationship that had clearly been bad for me and bad for him too, I think.
Yeah.
And I was in this bout of burnout and I just couldn't tolerate it anymore. And the relationship had gotten so neglectful and toxic and unclear about commitment. And I had this turning point moment, and I was living in Chicago at the time. It was the dead of winter. We had gone out to dinner, and it was just very clear like I was done. It wasn't good for me. It wasn't good for him. And it was like snowing outside. I was in my winter boots and my parka, and I ended things. And I was just like, it's not good for us. Like, we need to just separate. And we did on that street corner. And then I walked back to my apartment in the snow, in the dark. And at the time, I had no money. So I was in a 250-foot square apartment in one of the neighborhoods of Chicago. So I walked up the stairs, opened my door, and closed it behind me and sat down on the floor. And because my bedroom was also my living room, my mirror was right there. And I looked at myself and I was waiting to feel devastated or nothing or angry or scared. And instead, my whole body like sighed. I felt immense relief. And that was the moment where I realized that I had been working on my body in the yoga and the meditation and the stretching and the resting. And I had been working on my mind in therapy and meditation. I had even been working on my energy at that point. But at that moment, everything that I had learned about neuroscience clicked into place. And I was like, oh, your relationships can make you sick too. It can actually impact your body. And this was back in 2012. So we're having different conversations now, but it was a huge epiphany for me
Right.
to recognize that maybe my relationships were playing a huge role in my mental and physical health. And at that point, I went after that in the research. I started looking at that and doing things differently.
Incredible. And it can be relationships, friendships, family, anywhere someone in your life just isn't the right person for you, and the relationship can be toxic. So, you've mentioned all the things you were doing, and we definitely are a world that loves self-care now. And I think people finally are understanding that they need to take care of themselves. But what do you think this standard self-care advice is getting wrong?
Mm.
Why didn't it work for you?
Sure. So I actually think self care is great as it is. I think that the self care messaging has gotten so much better since back then. Know now, so many people know about Epsom salt baths and the importance of taking care of yourself and having a good sleep regimen. And we've got rings and watches and all the things that are helping us with self care. I think about self care as maintenance. So you brush your teeth because you have teeth and you want to keep them healthy, right?
Yep.
Self care is about eating well because we know that good nutrition has an impact on everything. We maintain our spaces, right? With keeping them clean. And I have plants. That's a huge part of my self care. So for me, the difference actually came in recognizing that self care is one thing, it's all about maintenance.
Right.
And we have great systems of that. What we don't have, which is what I built because I needed something, right? Like I needed something to help me, is that we don't have systems for self regulation. And that's a completely different conversation. So, self regulation, from my perspective, is about management. It's
Mhm.
about managing what you take into your system and what you put out of your system. It's about recognizing when your system is overwhelmed. It's about noticing when you're frozen and shut down and figuring out how to regulate yourself around. And back then, when I was doing the research, we didn't have real strategic systems around self regulation, which could be put into a step by step process.
Yeah.
So that's what I had to figure out. So I actually think that self care in and of itself is great, and everybody should have a really solid self care practice. But for me, what was life changing and continues to be life changing is that practice of self regulation is even more important sometimes because that's what's going to manage how your body, your mind, and relationship actually function.
Right. 100%. It's literally, I have a program for women going through divorce, and it's the first thing we talk about. And it's something we talk about every week in the program, not because I'm obsessed with it, but because it's the most important thing. And people come in looking for a divorce coach, and they want to know if you have schedules and parenting plans, and how are you going to help me with my finances and tell me how much alimony I'm going to get, because the fear that they have around their future with their children and finances is real. But what I tell them is, unless you know how to regulate your nervous system, you're not going to be even be able to be present in the meetings where these decisions are going to be made.
Mm.
So we have to form really good habits and understanding of what's going on in your body with your nervous system, because I've had clients who come to me after they've gone to court. They don't remember they're like, I don't know what I agreed to. They go to settlement meetings. So, from my primary population, this is so important, but most of them don't know. And I think for the general population, most people don't know how important this is, and they don't really understand nervous system and window of tolerance and these things really enough. I certainly didn't. And it really changes everything. It also changes your relationships, changed my relationships with my kids. But let's talk about, you created can I call it a system, a paradigm, gravity point, and you used your 20 years of research with this program, and it sounds very similar to things that I do with my people, probably more thorough and systematic. So I can't wait to hear more details about it. But it's essentially a prevention program, a preparation program in my terms, but a prevention first, systematic approach to getting through and resolving stress and trauma. So describe Gravity Point and the method to somebody who's never heard of it and has no idea what I'm even talking about right
So, at its heart, so let me back up and first say that there's so much that goes into a paradigm of prevention. And some of this might not be interesting to your listeners, but I'll say it because it sets the stage. The thing about self regulation is that it is the foundation upon which everything else in your life is built. It's the program constantly running in the background that's like forming the building blocks of how you function, whether that's how your heart is beating or your blood is flowing or how you're breathing, right, in your body or how much tension you're carrying. It's forming the building blocks of the thoughts and the beliefs and the truths and sort of the scripts that we have in our mind. And it is always informing what we're attracted to in friendships or romantic relationships, how we connect, how we disconnect from people.
now.
So, self regulation or regulation overall is like this cycle that's constantly running, whether or not we're paying attention to it. And I think the biggest thing we have to understand is that it is those building blocks. So we need to understand those building blocks if we want to feel good in our bodies and think really wonderful things in our minds and connect and act in the highest way in our relationships. So, just as a basis, let's talk about that building block. The analogy that we can use for regulation, and your listeners might already know this because you talk about it so eloquently all the time. I think about regulation as balance. And so, if you have a building built on balance, that's a really strong building, right?
Yeah.
But regulation is balance, then that means dysregulation is imbalance. And if we build our foundation in a way that is wobbly and weak, then it's not going to be very strong. And we're constantly going to be picking up the pieces of our lives,
Yeah.
sometimes quite literally.
Yep.
So when I started this work, when I had to save myself, because that's what happened, I
Yeah.
didn't start this work because I wanted to help my clients, even though I'm very altruistic. I didn't do this because I loved my students, even though I do. This work came from a place of desperation for me, being I can't look to the other models anymore. I have to figure out what this regulation thing is. Like, how does this actually work? So, one of the things that happened was I got so burnt out that I became a bad therapist. I say that lightly and humorously because I wasn't actually bad, but there was one session where I must have been just on the brink. I was very exhausted and I just could not listen to my sweet, loving, amazing, brave client anymore. This
Mm.
person had come in again talking about anger and venting and blaming and just disgruntled. And honestly, I was bored and burnt out and I didn't want to hear it anymore. So, in the gentlest way possible, and this only worked because this client and I had a really good relationship based on humor
Yeah.
and authenticity and kind of play. But
Yeah.
at some point, I was zoning out again. I was shutting down and I was just tired of hearing them complain. So, I cut them off and I said, I don't think this is what's going on for you. You have been venting about this for a really long time and you're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
So we're not going to talk about your anger anymore. My body's shutting down and feeling low and slow, and that does not match, what anger should look like.
Yeah.
So I said, we're not talking about your anger anymore. We are not blaming other people. I wonder if you're actually feeling very disappointed because this isn't working out for you. So I made them change their story. That's what I did. And within a couple of minutes, my client was crying. I was getting teary eyed, and they had this emotional release.
Yeah.
And I felt better. Selfishly, I felt better in the room. I felt relieved. I felt more energized. I felt more hopeful. And my client left that session. And a week later, they came back and they were in a completely different place. And that's when it really clicked for me that part of regulation is making sure that we are aligned and authentic,
Mm.
making sure that what we say with our words matches our body.
Yeah.
And so, in a very simple way, that's what regulation is. It happens when what we feel in our body matches what we think in our mind, and that matches how we act in our relationships. And that flow from our mind to or from our body and mind to our relationships, that's the cycle. That's the stress response cycle. And that's what
Yeah.
can keep us regulated, but it has to be aligned.
Which is hard because of all the input we're getting from other people and our phone and our world. It's hard to stay aligned. It's hard to live authentically and
Yes.
not accidentally step out. But you're absolutely right. The minute you aren't living aligned, you feel it in so many different ways.
Yes. And so many of us, we fall out of alignment, not because we're broken or be our fault, or if it's even
Yep.
in our control. It is because the world around us becomes overwhelming. We run out of resources to cope, or there's somebody with more power, whether that's physical power or economic power, or it's something in our culture. And that really is oppressive on
Mm.
the stress system, on that regulation process. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't feel aligned at all, welcome to the club because I fall out of alignment all the time.
It's
That's an
this isn't something where you can stay in alignment all the time.
no.
But I love the power of now. The moment you realize you're out of alignment, you're moving back into alignment. It's the moment you realize that you weren't awake and you weren't present, you are now back into the present moment. It's the same with alignment, I have found. But I can stay out of alignment for a while, and then I'm like, "Why do I feel so terrible? Why am I in a bad mood? There's nothing going on that should put me in this place. Everything is happening the way I wanted it to. I'm getting what I asked for." And so, yes, but I'm I'm doing something. I'm either searching or I'm trying to force something instead of allowing things to come to me. That's important for me. I don't know if human design,
I
you know,
do, yeah.
I'm a manifester in human design. And so anytime I feel anger, first of all, my whole life I tried to not be angry, right? Because I hate the feeling of being angry, which I now understand. Because when I'm out of alignment, I feel anger. But what I had to realize was I can't suppress that feeling of anger. I have to let it come. If I suppress it, then I don't know what's going on. But now I recognize, oh, I feel angry. It must be out of alignment for me. And I think we each have, whether you believe it in human design or something else, like there are feelings, emotions, and states of being that tell us when we're out of alignment. And so that's part of our process to figure that out. Do you agree with that? Or
Yes.
am I making sense?
No, I am, like, nodding over here so much. Recognizing when we're out of alignment looks differently for all of us,
Yep,
and that is I think, one of the great privileges to have as a human being is we get this person in our lifetime, us, like myself, me, that I had the immense honor of getting to know. And there are so many things that go into who we are. And a lot of that is based on what has happened to
yep,
us. Some of it is definitely temperament. And now I know your neurotype and being highly sensitive, those things play a huge role. Genetics also plays a role too. And also, what we're finding is that the events that we experience in our life, especially early on, require us to respond to them in a certain way.
yep,
So, if you have an event in your life early on where you have a loss and you're surrounded by adults who just want to move on and just want to get a new puppy or move on after the funeral or skip over the hard part, then our system learns that things like disappointment are not accessible. Like we should just shut those down. And these are not conscious decisions. We don't make this consciously. You can't be a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old consciously figuring out how you're going to respond to the world around you. And so those patterns come sort of part of whether you call it your personality or your temperament or who you are. I just call them patterns because that's what they are.
yeah, yep,
Recognizing those patterns is the first part of noticing that you can do something about them. And
yep,
so when I was at that stage, when I was really burnt out and figuring out that there's a huge difference between alignment and misalignment, out what my patterns were and how to resolve them and get back into alignment became like everything to me. That was my calling. That was research. Every interaction I had became about, okay, I know I'm dysregulated, but I don't have enough tools and language to get myself regulated. So, how do I build those for myself first and also share them with my clients as well?
So there are lots of ways that people can learn about themselves, and I want to get to your specific process, but I guess I want to ask first, do you have a method that you prefer? My boyfriend he has a lot of complex trauma and big T trauma and just all kinds of things from his childhood. So he's doing a lot of work and he likes to grab onto labels, which I think a lot of people do. Oh, I'm an avoidant. I'm INFJ. I'm all of these things. And in some ways, it's really helpful. As a couple, it was really helpful early on for us to realize that I was still somewhat anxious and he was pretty avoidant, and for us to understand what that meant for our nervous systems. Now, thankfully, I was in therapy school and I was learning and it was a very trauma focused program. So I could come up with labels and identify our patterns for us, and then we could talk through. And so we have a unique relationship in that we often speak in things like window of tolerance. We use those terms even though he's not a therapist.
How lovely.
It's helped us tremendously. He'll say, I just need space. I still love you. He knows to reassure. And when I'm triggered on my chest, I have the chest pain. I'm like, I can feel it in my chest. He's okay. What do we need to do? I'm a cuddler. I need his chest time to calm my nervous system, and he needs space. So we talk about it. Like, this is, we're opposites here. So I know I can give him sometimes just 10 or 15 minutes of space. And he knows that as soon as he feels okay, I need to come and just lay on him. And then we can both be regulated and talk about the issues that are coming up. But that has taken, we're nearing the 3-year mark and we're still learning ourselves. The labels have helped. Sometimes there have been times earlier on in our relationship where the labels were hurtful because he would say, this is what I do because I'm an avoidant. And I was like, but the goal is to not be. The goal is for us to both be more secure. So, how do you help people? I know I'm a Pisces. My human design is a manifester. Like, investigating and learning about those things has been helpful too. I believe in science. I believe in woo. I believe in all the things. What if a new client was coming to you, how would you help them explore their patterns? Are you using any of these things I'm talking about? Or you have your own system? How do you figure out people's patterns?
So I did build my own system. I am a huge fan of zodiac and human design and all the things. I think that there is immense wisdom in Eastern traditions and there's immense wisdom in Western science as well. So I have built a paradigm that actually integrates both. So back when I was starting to build this, right, and I was like desperate to figure out what was going on, I started in the field of neuroscience, particularly
Mhm.
interpersonal neurobiology. You actually introduced your listeners to the polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges. That
I
was a
love the yep.
huge part of what I started with, as well as an area called affective science, affective systems by Jaak Pinksup and Lucy Biven. And basically, they had discovered that the brain, like the human body, has different kinds of sort of circuitry for different sort of functioning. So they have really fun and powerful names to them. One of them is the rage system.
Hmm.
So that rage system is all dedicated to mobilizing us into fight and to pursuing something. There's lust, which I think inherently we
Yep.
understand what lust motivates us to do. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's like fear and care and panic and play. And when you look at those systems, you can actually start to understand how you tend to default.
Mm.
So, for example, I tend to default to rage. That is my trigger. That's usually my defense. Like someone else is wrong, something else is wrong, or completely shut down. That one's also a favorite. So, understanding my patterns in terms of the neuroscience was really helpful. And
Yeah.
looking at which systems are overactive, which ones am I leaning on too much, which ones am I not using at all.
Yeah.
So, fast forward, I then layered that research in neuroscience on top of yogic philosophy and the chakra system. And then also looking at quantum mechanics and how actually like reality is constructed at the very subatomic particle level. And then also, since we're talking about metaphysics, looking at A Course in Miracles, looking at practices in alchemy. And what came out of this are 20 stress responses. There are 20 different ways that the human system or tools that we use to respond to our world. One of them is definitely fight. One of them is flee. So sometimes we'll avoid and pull away. But there are all kinds of other names that emerged from the research, like frown. We actually have a full mechanism where we process disappointment and we're meant to cry and we're meant to slow down. We have one called friend that I called friend because it's bonding and reaching out. So these 20 stress responses are what I ultimately call the gravity points because they create like constellations of certain feelings and certain thoughts and certain actions that we can observe within ourselves.
Yeah.
So I can tell when my fight response is off the charts, right?
Right.
And I can now recognize when instead I need to friend.
Oh, your speaker, just a second, you got muted. There you go. There you go.
Is that
Don't know what
better?
happened.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I think it's on my end today. So thanks for your patience. So I was just saying, I think it's a beautiful response that you have with friend, with your boyfriend, right?
Yeah.
My system is different, but it's based on a lot of solid research. And now what I do is I'm looking at somebody based on how they're feeling, thinking, and acting. And I want to create a pattern for them and then reflect it back to them and show them what parts are shut down and need to be activated and what parts are overactive at time. So that's the system that I've developed so that people can really understand themselves in that way. And then the tool that I have and that I published in my first book is a step-by-step process to regulate all of them every time in any situation. So that's a
Wow.
very tangible tool. You don't need to know your pattern to get regulated. You just need to follow this process.
What does the process look like? What is that? I don't want you to give it all away, but
Sure. I It is really the first thing that needs to happen at the beginning of this process is you just need to notice that you're off.
yeah.
And off looks differently for everybody, as we've been talking about. Sometimes I'm off, and what's happening for me is I get stuck in these days of self criticism where I'm like, whoa, where did this gremlin come up? I have no
Right.
idea why this started. Sometimes I'm off because I'm suddenly very depressed and shut down and I have no energy.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm off because I'm raging and I'm blaming and I like hate the world, right? Like, it looks different ways. That's what we call a triggering situation. You're not yourself. You're out of alignment. And so the first step is really recognizing that. And then the process that I've built, which came from so many thousands of hours of sitting with clients and looking at the research, is a step by step process of really journal prompts that are meant to activate all 20 responses in your system so that they resolve. So that by the time you're done, you've done two things. One, you have brought yourself into alignment because you cleared out every single system that we work with. And then the process in and of itself also leads to a decision. I tend to believe that we are all the experts in our own life, and the answer is only within ourselves. And so this process, at the same time that it's regulating you, leads you through these sort of journal prompts and this experience of making a decision of how you're going to engage in the situation. So you go from feeling lost and overwhelmed and dysregulated to feeling loving and hopeful and really strong in a decision that you can take right then and there in that situation to move forward.
I love that. I love the empowerment of the person being able to help themselves with a tool that I feel like people think they always need someone else or something else. And we really have so much more power on ourselves
Mhm.
to heal ourselves than we give ourselves credit for. So I love that.
Thanks. It came from an experience of being overwhelmed myself. Back when I was in that bout of burnout as a therapist, I changed the way I worked. And I would have Wall Street type people laying on the floor with their legs up doing regulation practices in the middle of their day. And what happened was all of my clients stayed with me. I had no turnover. And when I had to change jobs, because I actually coordinated the launch of an entire online education program as well at that time, I had to terminate with some of my clients. And I had those clients calling me afterwards, being like, is there any way you can come back? And at the same time, my students were wanting more of me. And then in 2018, when I started my coaching business, I was doing one on one work, I was doing small group work, I was doing certification work. And it was just very clear that I needed to simplify this because I had to be able to replicate myself. Like, I could no longer be the authority. And that's where this first book that I've written on the paradigm has come out, because over and over again, I would speak to people who either didn't have the time or money to work with me,
Yep.
or who were looking for something simple and straightforward and didn't want to know all the research. So honestly, if it weren't for all of the feedback and people telling me there needed to be a book, I think I would have stayed within my coaching paradigm and I would have
Yeah.
stayed with that. But in creating the book, I had to simplify it and make it so strategic that it is much more powerful than been without it, which means that anybody can pick up this book. Like, you don't even have
I
to
love that.
read it. You can actually, I say this in the beginning, if you don't want to read this book, go to the back, go through the prompts and start your practice right now. And I feel like
Wow.
we're so overwhelmed right now that we need more of those tools that we can jump and use right now.
We do, and I think there's some really great books that have really great strategies. I don't know if you've ever read the book Homecoming, and it's incredible inner child work through, and the prompts are fantastic, and he has you write with your right hand and your left hand, and it's great, but I don't know that anyone's gonna have time to do that,
Mhm.
right? Like, you have to be in a space where you're really dedicated to healing
Mhm.
to get through that. We need things that we can do quickly
Yes.
and tools that we can do quickly, so I love it.
I worked really hard. Like,
You're like,
it was
"I love it."
it was so hard to take something really complex and make it something that anybody can sit down and do. But the response that I've gotten from it has been so humbling. People
Mm.
saying, like, people picking up the book and being like, this isn't even that thick. I feel like I could get through this. And,
Yeah.
having like counselors buy one book at the beginning and then hear me speak and then buy several more because they know that it's practical. And I feel like I am really proud of that, and I cannot tell you how hard it was. It's so
Oh,
hard.
I'm sure, and you have so much research. I love the research, I love that you've incorporated energy work, that you've put all of these elements together because that's how I practice. I find people don't need me that long. I think it's because I do so much regulation work for them and they feel better. They're always like, I wanna come back, but I'm doing great." I'm like, "You don't need to come back. Come back if you need me." But we need self-help tools that work and that don't create a dependency on us.
Right.
Like, we don't. People can't afford it for one thing, and they need to be able to figure out how to help themselves. So I love this. Why do you think a lot of practitioners, therapists, coaches still rely on guesswork? And what would happen if they didn't, if they gave people tools to help themselves?
So I think, so I've been deep in the practitioner world,
Mm.
not only because I was a client and then I was trained as a therapist, and then I was trained as a marriage and family therapist, and then I was trained as a trauma therapist, and then I do all the specialized training as well. But I was also a university professor. And
Yeah.
I was a university professor at 3 different universities, top curriculum, top enrolling, top reputation in terms of my counseling field. There are so many good programs out there. But I got an interesting and really thorough experience in the training process as well, in very different ways, in very different universities. And there's a lot that goes into building university programs and training programs that students and practitioners don't see. There's a lot of requirements for standards, and there's things called accreditation. So you have to know certain things in order to graduate a program and then to then get a license. So there's a lot of safety in a very smart way built into training programs. At the same time, because the programs have to move slowly and responsibly with figuring out what practitioners learn, a lot of practitioners are still learning theories that came out in the 30s. And I say
Right.
1930s, I got to say 19 now, the 1930s, the 1960s, the 1970s. Um, and you need specialized training in things that are more contemporary, like EMDR. and
Right.
specialized training. Like, you have to go outside of your program for that. So I think all of this is to just say that I think that practitioners are not consciously doing guesswork. I think that they are doing amazing work that is well informed by what they have learned. The thing that I struggled with, and one of the reasons why I stepped away from university work, is because I tried to get my material into the curriculum. Like, I tried to teach more interpersonal neurobiology. I tried to teach more about the importance of vicarious stress, which we haven't talked about yet, but like, my model incorporates the idea that the stress that you pick up from other people is processed in a very similar way as the stuff that
Mhm.
comes from you originally. So I
Right.
tried to get a lot of that into the programming, but I just couldn't because universities move so slowly. So I think practitioners are doing an amazing job with what they have. They just don't have a paradigm that is specific enough to how being human actually works. So when I think about my work, I don't think about it as a replacement for anything. I don't think about it as being better or worse than anything that's out there. I see it as a natural expansion of our knowledge base. And when you know more about how a system works, then you can intervene more specifically. Whereas I was taught fight, flight, and freeze, which is like three. And maybe if you're lucky, you've heard of fawn and tend and befriend. So we maybe got 6 stress responses. There's only so much that you can do having that map, right?
Right.
Mine has 20. And just by it's over 3 times as more with the modeling. When you have better modeling, you can have better methods. The reason why my system and this step-by-step process we just talked about takes the guesswork out is because it is not coming from a paradigm that's really high level. It's
Yeah.
built on the groundwork of regulation that's happening in the system, which is why it works so well.
How is addressing dysregulation patterns or these patterns that you're talking about different than treating a disorder? Because I think in regards to the last question, like while you're in school, you have to learn all the disorders,
Mhm.
right? There's a lot of controversy to some of these disorders actually just trauma? Is it just dysregulation? But we know that there are some disorders. What's the difference?
So this is going to feel tangential, but this is what's coming to me. So let's talk about dysregulation first. So imagine that you have a small creek, like a little tiny river. Okay. And today we've been talking about how regulation is balance and dysregulation is imbalance. So when you have a river running through a forest, it creates a path. And that path wears away at the ground. And then you get a riverbed, and there's like this pathway, right? There's a pattern of water, but it turns into a pathway. When even you remove the water, that pattern's still going to be there, right? So a regulated river has just the right height of water. It's moving at just the right pace so that everything around it can thrive, right? The plants are coming up and the animals are drinking. There's balance. Dysregulation, right, would be if that river suddenly flooded, right? And so it's really high and it's unruly. So it's going through trees and is knocking things down. And it's now creating that massive destruction because there's too much water. It's too fast, right? That's one kind of dysregulation. Another kind of dysregulation with this analogy would be if the riverbed dried up. So now it's all shriveled up and shut down. And now there's not enough water. So now the plants are dying and the animals are dying and the fish are dead. And right. So dysregulation is the water and the amount of water. And whether it's flowing or not, or how fast it's flowing, or if there's no water, that's dysregulation. But let's say we remove the water. Disorder and disease is what's left behind. So that forest that's now been leveled, you can't fix that right away. You can't manage the water anymore or manage the flow of water. Like, you have trees that are down, you have grasses that are not growing back, you have
Yeah.
plants and animals that are struggling, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can't fix that problem by regulating the water anymore. You need to come in and do something different. Like you need
Yeah.
bigger interventions. You need to plant new trees. You need to clean things up. Okay. That's how I think about the difference between dysregulation and disorder. Dysregulation is managing your energy, and it's something that all of us can control. But if we are dysregulated for long enough in certain ways, it creates like these pathways and this destruction that needs a higher intervention. So when I was a therapist, I was trained to be like the reforestation people. Like the damage
Yeah.
is done, there is trouble, we need to do some cleanup. And that kind of intervention requires a lot of specific training, a lot of regulation, because you don't want to plant the wrong trees, right? You don't want to introduce different thought patterns if they're not like
Right.
matched for the problem. You don't want to give somebody like relational skills if they're struggling from narcissistic abuse. There's certain have to happen, right?
Yeah.
That to me is the disease and disorder and discord. That's how I think about
Yeah.
it. So that's the
Yep.
paradigm of pathology. We need that
Yeah.
because once damage is done, you need somebody highly trained and highly regulated to help you because the stakes are higher.
It's more than a dysregulation issue.
Exactly. At the same
Yeah.
time, as we just talked about, like with this funny river example, the problem that created the disease and disorder was the water in the first place
Yeah.
and the regulation of the energy. It's how we're feeling and thinking and acting at any time that eventually produces those
Yeah.
long-term problematic patterns. So the work that I have built is I'm trying to create, no, I'm not trying to, I have created a paradigm that helps us understand dysregulation with the same kind of specificity that we've been understanding disorder. So
Yeah.
instead of being like, okay, we need to give you a diagnosis of depression, my question is, what stress responses are shut down that are
Yeah.
making you dysregulated and shut down, which is feeling like your system is depressed? So everything that I'm building is about mapping out dysregulation and then ultimately resolving it. So this first book, I skipped right to the good stuff. I started with here's a solution, start practicing it now. And then in future books, we'll build out this paradigm that I'm talking about.
Yeah. Love that. That was I love the imagery that you used to describe that because it makes perfect sense. Now, add in when people have experienced, let's say, divorce, death, loss of a job, like some really big life event, even a real big T trauma, and that activate and causes a reactivity that's different too than just day-to-day overwhelm or burnout and dysregulation. But ultimately, as a trauma therapist, we believe that it's reactivating probably earlier traumas that we've experienced. So, how is something like that different? And I'm asking because I want anyone who's listening to understand, I guess, the power of getting help. And it's different. Like you can read the book and become dysregulated. I think a lot of people still need to have awareness that they are dysregulated. I think most people are walking around and have no idea. Life is just bad or hard, or they're experiencing depression or high anxiety. But what's going on differently when we've experienced something really hard and really traumatic? You can use divorce or the death of a loved one or a big trauma if you want, but explain how that's then what we just talked about, just dysregulation or a disorder. Now add in this other layer.
Yes. So, one of the things that I realized early on is that it's all about scale, but the system doesn't change. So, let me explain. So, whether you, and this is not meant to minimize it, but whether you go through a divorce and are struggling with the loss of a partner, or you lost your favorite shirt and you're disappointed about that, the neural circuitry is very similar, but the scale is obviously much different. I'm like even tentatively making this comparison, but I really want to make a point because the thing that I discovered in my research is that when it comes to trauma work, when it comes to regulation work, when it comes to stress, it actually has very little to do with the situation. The details of the situation are not that important to your body. It's how your body feels about it that really makes a difference. So the way that I talk about it is when you're doing any kind of emotion regulation work, healing work, trauma work, stress work, dysregulation work, whatever you want to talk about, the situation is not as important as the sensation because your sensation, your unique patterns of how you deal with sensation is how you perceive the world. So let me go back to our river example. Okay.
Yeah.
So imagine that you have a huge forest and you have lots of rivers, let's say 20, to tie it back to the 20 stress responses. You have 20 different rivers, they're all connected, and they're all flowing. When you're a kid, you have to learn how to manage those rivers. And really, it's like managing your inner world of how you feel. That's really what we're doing, right? Like things
Yeah.
happen and we have to figure out how we feel about it. We have to figure
Yep.
out how we think about it. And we have to then act. And usually that's just happening so fast we don't even keep track of it, right? Like,
Right. But we're also watching the adults around us and
exactly.
taking note of how they do, which might tell us how we're supposed to
Yes.
experience.
In fact, in this analogy, the adults are the one pouring water into our world. Like they're the ones that are showing us how to deal with things, how to manage things, and also what they can handle is
Yeah.
our cap for what we get to experience, right? So if we're very
Yeah.
angry, but we learn that yelling back at our mom or a dad or our moms or our dads, like shuts them down, our little
Yeah.
tiny nervous system is going to learn, oh, that feeling is a threat because I need my parents to be happy, healthy, and whole. I need them to function because without them, I can't live on this
Yep.
world, right? So we
Yep.
depend on the adults in our life. And so they're the ones teaching us how to manage our water and how to manage our inner worlds. So now let's imagine we're looking at all of our rivers from the aerial view, right? So we see all these beautiful lines of rivers from above. All of those experiences with the adults in our life, whether we've had abuse or neglect, or we're part of a marginalized community and we've had systemic oppression, we've had significant losses, like all of those things are going to show up in this aerial view of our rivers because we're going to see from the sky which rivers are big and thick and we've been using a lot
Yeah.
and which rivers we have not. So let me make this into an example of myself. Okay. So when I was about 12 years old, which is a complicated time for being in a female body anyway, when I
Very.
was little, one of my friends was actually murdered and it was terrible. Right. And
Oh,
yeah, it was terrible. But I don't have any memories of anybody talking to me about it because she wasn't in my grade, but I knew her. And okay. So I didn't have people helping me mourn that loss. So what does that mean?
right.
That means that frown in particular, let's talk about that stress point. Frown
Yep.
is all about processing disappointment and loss. That was a dried riverbed for me. Like if
Yeah.
you looked at all of my rivers from the sky down, there was
Yep.
nothing running through that. I didn't have that as a tool to cope.
Yeah.
Instead, I did things like became a straight A student and became super responsible. And that's how I survived that. So then, fast forward a few years, my parents get divorced. That's another layer of loss.
Yep.
So now I don't have the frown response. I don't have the ability to mourn that loss. So then what do? I become more high achieving and that river gets thicker. I get more responsible. Fast forward to breakups and betrayals and things like that later on in my life. That pattern repeats over and over again because I don't have access to frown. I don't have access to it. So what happens then, and this gets back to your question, I know this has been long-winded, but it gets back to your question of like, how is this different? So now let's say I myself got divorced. That would pour a ton of water into my river system. it would be a huge event that required me to cope with it because it's a big event, changing all aspects of my life, right? It's not losing a sweater. It's not losing a shoe or losing my
Right.
car keys. It's a huge thing that impacts everything. My relationships, my friendships, my financials, my relationships with my kids, my level of safety. The difference between that and a lower scale thing is that it's going to require all of your system to adapt. So then what happens is you get this backlog.
Because if one system isn't working at all,
Right.
other ones get overflowed.
Yes, exactly.
Perfect sense.
Yes. So
Makes perfect
then
sense.
those traumas that happen to us in the present, when they are bigger, it's large scale dysregulation, but that is happening on top of like the scarring and the dysfunction that you had to learn earlier in your life. So the only difference though, you still
Yeah.
have to process the divorce by healing that for that frown neural circuitry.
Yep.
The thing looks the same, even though
Yeah.
the level of dysregulation might be different.
So can I give you an example along these lines and you tell me which system would be down? I think that might be interesting. It's
Sure.
helpful for me. And so if you are a child who has a mother who's pretty depressed and you learn early on what you said before, you learn early on that your emotions and your anger and your sadness, any of your emotions really overwhelm her or make her uncomfortable. And then that in reaction makes you feel unsafe because you feel unsafe if she's unsafe. And let's say you're parentified and codependent. Like you've learned you've got to be okay so mom can be okay. Fast forward, you struggle with feeling like your emotions are a burden. So you choose to not share them and always put on a brave face and something like divorce happens. Which rivers are inaccessible in that situation?
So, a great example, I think a lot of us can identify with that because so many of us learn which emotions are safe and which emotions are not before we're
Mhm.
even like 6 years old. Like we have
Yeah.
that in our nervous system. So, in this case, so there are 20 stress responses, right? So some of them you're going to be hearing for the first time as I'm telling you, which are probably shut down, but they are introduced in the book for anybody interested to unpack them.
Yeah.
So, first of all, what might be shut down is going to be something that I call foretell. So, foretell is the stress response. I call them gravity points, so I might use those interchangeably.
No,
But
that's great. That's good.
foretell is a gravity point that harmonizes your inner world and your external world.
Okay.
So, foretell is what allows you to notice what's going on inside and say it on the outside. So, for those of us who have learned that talking about our feelings like really disrupts our system, like our family system, foretell
Yeah.
usually gets shut down.
Okay.
These are guesses, but again, this is what I've been doing for the last 10 years. The other thing I would guess is shut down is flee. So, flee is probably one that sounds familiar. It's not maladaptive and it's not just a trauma response. Flee is what creates space between us and other people. And so, for those of us who are enmeshed, I myself included, so I'm talking about myself, have access to flee. We don't always know when we're too close and we need to back away. So, flee.
Just saying the word flee gave me a little chest pain. So
Oh,
yeah.
I don't
So yeah, it's definitely not accessible for me
know.
at
So,
all.
I
Even when it needs to be, it really, yeah. Okay.
so I will say that is the power of this work. I actually don't want to tell you a bunch of them to overwhelm you because what
Okay.
happens.
I have therapy in 2 hours,
Oh,
so we're
okay. That's very brave and authentic of you, but this is what happens. Like,
yeah.
this is what happens when I start talking about the work. This is what happens when people start learning the names of the gravity points is like you just have these reactions to it. Because if you remember at the very beginning, when I talked about that client who I was like, you're not angry or disappointed. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
It really just is having more language sometimes for what's going on. And then the floodgates open. Like your brain becomes integrated, your system automatically heals. So yeah, I could continue listing them, but that is the power of having the language and why this paradigm that I've built works so well. It's not because it's better or fancier or whatever. It's because it's more specific. And the words that I've chosen have been honed over a decade. And when I say them and describe them, the system recognizes them and turns them on.
Incredible. And I firmly believe like having the language to go along with our feelings, our emotions, our gravity points is critical. I love Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown. And I use it as a reference. It's sitting right here. Like when I'm feeling something or if a client's feeling something, just to look through and try to identify what word can we put with this. It's very powerful.
It is the healing. It takes the left side of your brain and where we produce all of our language and it connects it to the right and the lower parts. Like without the right language, we really can't heal.
No. Wow. Very cool, incredible. I can't wait to get the book and try it with some people and myself. And definitely my boyfriend he's going to love it because he loves this kind of.
Thank you. Yeah.
No,
I mean, I
it's
love labels too. So that's part of the magic of building this paradigm is if I didn't have the right name for it, if I didn't have that resonance that you just felt when I named Flea, the right word. So,
right.
yeah.
No, I felt it. I think I already said I am definitely a freeze. I even have a place to go when I know I'm in freeze and a process I put myself through to let myself sit in it because all of these mechanisms that we have them for a reason to protect us. And it's okay to sit in it for a little bit. Like I know where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do. I'm going to sit there for a little bit and then I know to start moving and doing my process. But I probably lived most of my 30s in dysregulation of different types, but a lot of freeze.
Yes.
And I didn't know. I didn't have the word for it. I didn't know what it was. And now it's so powerful to know immediately, oh, something just threw me. Like, oh, that's something someone said or someone did, or somebody's birthday that was to be significant. Like
It's all the
all these
things.
things,
Yes. And
the things.
I tell people all the time that the curriculum that I'm building around self regulation needs to just be accessible to everybody because it's a basic tool. Like it's a basic part of being human. And stress is so often something that we think about as negative or something that needs to be coped with or something that needs to be put away. And we're only healed if we're in a state of peace. And that's great for the enlightened yogis, for like the householders and the people here with the boots on the ground. That's not how we're experiencing the world. Stress is a part of life. You experience it every single day. And the ability to process it needs to be just a fundamental part of being human. Then being able to cope with that stress and having the system, I think, is really important. One of the things, and this is just random, but you had said, now, and I feel this way too, now I know when my body is off, it talks to me. It's really good feedback and I can trust my body. But that was not the case. Much like you said, I was in freeze for most of my life and I couldn't trust my body. And as not only a highly sensitive person, but as an autistic person, sometimes my body waits a long time to give me feedback. So I think for anybody out there who might be like, my body does not talk to me. I don't know these sensations. I don't trust it. I can't trust it to tell me when something's wrong. That's okay. When you
Yeah.
start the regulation process and your nervous system starts to heal, that's when everything will come back online. So I don't want that was the other reason why I created this is because I had a great supervisor who like felt all the things in her body and I was like, "How are you doing that? I can't do that. I have to operationalize it." I just want anybody out there who doesn't have a connection with their body yet to know that it's okay and it
Yep.
doesn't mean you're not healing, and it doesn't mean that you can't heal because, like you're saying in your story, it comes with the process. Like,
It does.
yeah.
It does. And I attribute doing body scans daily during the 8-week MBSR program and then immediately going into a training program. I was at Brown, so it was incredible not only trainers, but the other students and the other people in the program. But it wasn't until my training session where I was more observing where I finally was like, oh, there's something in my chest. My jaw is clenched. Like, I had no awareness prior to
Wow.
that, none. And it took the body scans are incredible tools. It's one of the things I teach people in the divorce program and in all of my therapy clients because we just, we have, it's almost like a muscle you have to build to
Yes.
start being in your body. And yeah, I think that a lot of people don't know that they're not in their body. They don't know that they're dysregulated. They think that this is just the way we live because it's the way they've lived their whole life. And they also don't know or have an awareness of the things that impacted them in their childhood. And I know we don't have time to open this whole Pandora's box of that, but I want to say my parents' divorce, when it happened, I was 8, greatly impacted me. I know that now. But I, like you, I was like, nope, it's this is what builds people's resilience. And I'm a really strong person and it didn't affect me at all. As a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old, nope, it was the best thing that could have happened. And I did what you did. How many degrees can I collect? Like, I'm going to armor up with academia. Like, I have 3 or 4 math. How many? I've got 7 diplomas on the wall, a JD. I just got
Yeah.
my MSW. I'm sure a PhD is coming. Like, it's never ending. But that was my armor. That was my, like, I built, I guess, a river, like a massive thing over here to avoid dealing with or touching in anger, flee, probably 10 or more of the things of your gravity points. So, my point is that I've heard people lately in social media saying, let's stop blaming our parents for everything. This isn't about blaming. This is about understanding
Yeah.
what we went through, what happened, why we have false beliefs, why we can't use all of our gravity points, what created that. And we don't have to go digging it up extensively.
No.
We have to admit or recognize that things happened. I talk to clients all the time who another child commented on their leg size when they were 9 and their body dysmorphia started. It doesn't have to be that someone intentionally tried to hurt you or did something to you. It can be that in a moment, big or small, we didn't have access to reassurance or care or comfort.
Hmm.
And we internalized something that was never meant for us to internalize. Or it can mean that the church and the religion that we attended created shame in us. And there's not, we can still believe, have those belief systems, recognizing that as a child, as a sweet, innocent child, with only so much ability to process everything that was going on, we internalized something, created harm.
Yes.
It's okay. We don't have to hate our parents or blame people, but it's healthy to understand. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
1,000% to all of that. And one of the great comforts that came from my research for me is the complexity of our system. At any given moment, there are at least 20 different categories of emotions at one time in every situation that we're experiencing. And so far, the systems that we've had, which is okay, usually require us to process one of those emotions at a time. So I
Mhm.
think that sometimes makes people hesitant to do trauma work and accountability work because it only feels like I can love my parents or I can hate my parents. I can love this person or I can be damaged and angry about it. But in reality, if we look at all the 20 gravity points, just going back to 2 of them, you can feel fail, which is an anger response. Fail is this not working for me. That's an anger response.
Yep.
And friend, I am connected and appreciate and respect you at the same time. That's not where most of us are, and that's a lifelong journey to get there. Usually
Yeah.
we have to focus on one, but that is
Yep.
why the system that I built, the 20 steps, processes all the emotions in one triggering moment so that we don't have to feel like it's either or. Either I had a good childhood or I didn't. Either that person was good or bad. There can be a beautiful nuance somewhere in between. And I feel like that sometimes makes it a little bit more safer
Yep.
for to start unpacking their past. We don't need to demonize anyone to heal our dysregulation.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. I think it is really hard for people to understand. Like, so many people are black and white thinkers because of it kept them safe.
Yes.
And so unpacking that and saying two things can be true, three things, four things can be true at once.
Mhm.
And our parents were doing the best that they could
Mhm.
with the tools that they had and the trauma that they have and what they inherited. But they still, mine are all in therapy. That's how I feel good
Yes.
about the situation.
Same.
But they have very different experiences. My oldest had a 21-year-old mother. Like, I made some pretty big mistakes and I parentified him 100%, especially when I had my younger kids. Like, he was literally my parent, their parent.
Yeah.
So we talk about it all the time. And he'll say, "Don't look at yourself as a bad mom." And I'm like, "I don't see it that way.
Yes. 'Cause
I
it's
see
more
it as
complex.
so
Yeah.
complex." I want to ask you one last question. I read something yesterday, and this is kind of divorce centric, but I want to get your response to it. There was a post, and it said that we learn what people are really like. I'm paraphrasing as they move through divorce or once we've divorced them or something along those lines. And I had a very visceral response to that. No, like someone's character is not what we see. Someone's values, someone's true, authentic self, that is not who we see in a divorce. Do we see really terrible people do really terrible things to one another? Yes. Do we see just horrendous trauma coming from one side, both sides, all over, from attorneys? Yes. But for me, and especially from the place the post was coming from, I thought, ew. So I don't know, bias you with my opinion about it, but I think that we lack compassion. Like, we have this cancel culture and we lack compassion for people.
Yeah.
What is something like that? What is your response to something like that?
Sure.
Saying,
So one of the bigger picture things that I'm doing with Gravity Point is like my whole, and I feel like my mission and my calling is to help individual people heal themselves so that we can heal the world. Whether it's neuroscience that talks about resonance and mirroring, or yoga, or quantum mechanics, or metaphysics, or spiritual or religious paradigms, we all over the place have evidence that each individual one of us is actually part of a whole. So I'm just one little tiny piece of consciousness or love or God or nature or whatever you want to call it, the universe. And so I believe that we have a natural inclination as the human species to be in that state of oneness. And it's what in the book I call a true state, capital T true. And in a true state, we are able to honor ourselves and our individual feelings, thoughts, and actions authentically, while also being accountable to the whole and to know how our feelings, thoughts, and actions impact everyone and everything around us. So that's an integrated state. It's what I call a true state. And also, because life happens and it's overwhelming and we get dysregulated and we get disrupted and we get distorted, we can also enter what I call a trauma state, capital T, trauma state. And in that state, we lean into one of those states. We either become overly authentic and no accountability. So we lash out and we hurt people and we say things and we get violent and we amp up, or not holding other people accountable enough. And we are actually getting small and we shut down and we get quiet. And that trauma state is a byproduct of being disconnected from the whole. So I fundamentally believe, which is not always an easy belief to have, but I fundamentally believe that the human species and all of us in it are as a foundation designed to be loving, compassionate, generous, but also authentic and self preserving. And that anytime we are not in that state, we are dysregulated and we're in a trauma state.
Yep.
And divorce is a trauma, it is in your entire life. And I think it's very hard for people to remain in that unified true state when they're under that kind of stress. Long story short, I don't agree with that post. I think that when people are under immense stress, we see their trauma patterns. We don't see them.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. Yes. That's not their character. That's not who they really are. That's their trauma state.
That's who they needed to be to survive. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's really nasty and unpleasant, and we don't have to excuse bad behavior.
Right.
But we can hold space for understanding it.
Yes. I love that. And it's really important. I think we can understand and have compassion for people, but we also want to always be protecting ourselves and setting our boundaries to keep ourselves safe. So
Yes, safety
thank
first,
you for that.
otherwise nothing else matters.
All right. I want to ask one more question before we wrap up. For somebody who is listening and they want to do this type of work, or they have a loved one and they're like, oh my God, they need this work. Is there a mindset shift that has to happen before this process can work for
Mm.
someone?
I have been doing some kind of human helping support work for 20 years. And this take as for what it is, but I don't think that people change until they're in enough pain. And for some of us, that pain is very small. Like for some of us, like we are like, I am very
I have very low
motivated.
tolerance.
Yes, very low tolerance for pain. So many of us are like reaching for all the books and we're very motivated. And then there are some of us who live in dysregulation, but the consequences of it are not painful enough to motivate us. So I think that the work that I do is good for anybody who's curious. That's it. Anybody who's just starting to question, like, maybe could my life be better? Maybe there's something off. And for some of us, that is going to take a very low threshold of dysregulation because we're always curious. And
Yep.
then for some of us, you're not going to be motivated to even move through these journal prompts unless you have enough pain to motivate you to. It's funny to say that because I'm such like I want people to feel good and I want people to be seeking ascension. And I think I would say about 75% of the people that find me are there. And then about 25%, they need to hit that tipping point that motivates
Yep.
them because I think that the human system has an internal motivation that cannot
Mhm.
be externally motivated. So if you're listening and you're curious, like that's enough. Like you can.
Yeah. I agree 100%. I think curiosity is really key to awareness. And I also think we have to give people time. We have to move through certain phases, specifically when relationships are trying to end or they're ready to end. We have to sometimes go through a victim stage. We have to if there's been emotional abuse or any type of abuse, we have to understand that.
Mhm.
We have to understand how bad it is, right?
Yes.
And in order to have that understanding, sometimes we have to dig into what's happened to us.
Which is
But
why it's so important for each of us to become experts in our own life because
yeah,
our healing is on our timeline.
yep, yep. Can't we can force it on us and we can't force it on anyone else. And we all move through these phases at our own pace and we're when we're ready. So
Yeah.
yeah, it'd be wonderful to wave a magic wand and say, everyone just be curious about yourself and stop worrying about everyone else.
It's so great.
I do think my last question was going to be, do you think it's contagious? And I think so.
Yes, 100%. It is contagious. That's literally the principle that is embedded into the gravity point paradigm is like, if you heal yourself, you don't need to motivate or change anybody else.
Mhm.
Become a conduit of healing. And that's really how I believe that we will heal the entire world, is one nervous system at a time.
And one of my spiritual coach guide, whatever you want to call her, Ashley, who I worked with throughout my whole divorce, would say everything you're healing in yourself is healing forward and backward. So your mother and your grandmother, like it's going back and your children. And that was a huge motivator for me to keep going and keep doing the work. And I believe it was true. I could feel it. So if that motivates someone, then great.
Yeah,
Great.
absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming today. I feel like we could probably talk all day, but no one would listen that long because people have lives.
Thank you for having me. This was so lovely and resonant. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was great. I want to make sure people know how to find you, and that will be listed in the show notes. But just in case someone is listening and they can't look at the show notes right now, tell us like your social media handles, your website, and then just the book and where people can find it.
Sure. So I run an institute. So the website is gravitypointinstitute.com. And that's my handle on all social media, Gravity Point Institute. So there I have a free guidebook you can download and join my newsletter, and you can just follow
Great.
along on the journey.
For clinicians or practitioners, do you do any training to teach people about the paradigm, the program?
Yes. So right now I'm offering presentations to organizations. So talking about the paradigm and then talking about the book and how they can implement it into their work. So if you go to the website, there's actually a form for speaking opportunities and presentations. And that's how people can connect with me about those.
Wonderful, wonderful. Where is the book available to purchase?
So the book is only available on my website.
Okay,
And so that means that we are seeing every copy and making sure with quality control. So if you find my website, there will be a books page, and that's where it is.
wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been great. If you're listening and you want to follow up, like I said, everything will be in the show notes on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon. And I'll be sharing some clips on my Instagram so you can check those out. Thank you. I appreciate the work you're doing, and I'm excited to check it out myself.
Thank you.
For joining us.